On the day I married the man I loved, not a single family member showed up. Not even my father, Arthur, who had promised he'd be there to walk me down the aisle. Every single one of them, Aunt Carol and Uncle Frank, my mother Eleanor, and my father, had chosen instead to attend my sister Charlotte's opulent baby shower. The name is Audrey Hayes, and I'm 29 years old. Before I detail the central conflict in my story and how it is the clash between the family's relentless pursuit of perceived generational wealth and social status, and my journey to validate the true currency of talent, integrity, and self-made success, take a moment to drop a comment about where you're connecting from, and please hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this intense family drama unfolds. The following day, August 18th, I posted one photograph on Instagram. Less than an hour after that single digital declaration, my phone screen exploded with 47 missed calls and urgent text messages from every branch of my family tree. What seismic event could have rattled their carefully constructed world so suddenly? They truly believed they were aligning themselves with the winning side in a petty family rivalry of their own making, failing to see that the game was fundamentally rigged from the very first move, just not in the predictable way they assumed. My name is Audrey Hayes. For my entire life, I've played the role of the quiet understudy to my sister Charlotte's ceaseless one-woman spectacle. Our family functioned less like a supportive unit and more like a poorly diversified hedge fund operating out of Greenwich, Connecticut, with my mother, Eleanor, as the frantically managing CEO and Charlotte as the high-risk, high-reward flagship asset. Charlotte, you see, followed every unwritten rule of our clan. She married Harrison Davenport, whose family name carried the faint, musty scent of long-standing New England wealth, even if the current reality was closer to multi-generational refinancing. They lived in a sprawling estate in Greenwich where the towering boxwood hedges were sculpted into rigid geometric designs, and the conversations were just as meticulously controlled and hollow. Charlotte's existence was a perfectly choreographed production, and my family served as the perpetual investors, applauding loudly and hoping for a substantial emotional return. I, however, was the experimental, off-book venture they never bothered to understand. I chose a profoundly different trajectory. I chose Elias. Elias doesn't possess a surname that earns him a preferential tea time at the Winged Foot Golf Club. He has hands permanently stained with ink and graphite, hands that bring vibrant, complex worlds to life. He's a celebrated graphic novelist and storyteller who works from a small, light-filled studio attached to the rear of our rented clapboard cottage in upstate New York. A space that smells sweetly of aged paper and infinite possibility. To me, that scent is the pure fragrance of creation. To my family, it was the unmistakable reek of financial instability. They looked at his faded denim and his intense, quiet focus and saw not the uniform of a dedicated artisan, but the telltale signs of a man allergic to a real career. They couldn't grasp a life not defined by quarterly bonuses and property appraisals. When I announced our engagement, the reaction was less a joyous fanfare and more a collective, mournful sigh. My mother, Eleanor, instantly deployed her signature look of wounded disappointment, an expression she had perfected over years of my minor acts of rebellion. "Audrey, my dear," she lamented, "it's charming that you've found someone who shares your artistic inclinations. But one cannot frame inclinations and hang them on the wall of a house you can't afford." My sister Charlotte was far more blunt, her sympathy as thin and fragile as a sheet of sugar glass. "I just worry about you," she cooed, inspecting her flawless diamond ring. "It's a difficult world without a proper foundation. Her foundation, of course, was a trust fund that my father refilled with the dependable rhythm of the Atlantic tide whenever Harrison's latest investment opportunity turned into a financial black hole. The ultimate act of power was the scheduling. Charlotte, with a theatrical display of regret that must have been rehearsed for weeks, announced her extravagant gender reveal party for the exact same Saturday as my quiet wedding ceremony. It was a tactical masterstroke of social warfare, a brutal loyalty test disguised as an unfortunate coincidence. And the family, with a lemming-like predictability that I had long since come to expect, made their choice. They chose the promise of a Davenport heir and the gaudy spectacle of a confetti cannon over the quiet, profound vows of a daughter they had effectively written off. My father, Arthur, the man who taught me how to read, had promised. "I'll be there to walk you down the aisle, my girl," he'd said, meeting my eyes with what I mistakenly believed was sincerity. "I'll just have to slip away from the party for a little over an hour." He never came. The day of the wedding, my phone became a monument to their united front of indifference. I sat in the small, antique anteroom of the charming, ivy-covered chapel we'd booked in a historic district of Charleston, South Carolina. A bride in waiting, watching the clock hands creep toward 4 o'clock. One by one, the texts arrived, each a perfectly crafted little dagger of polite abandonment. "So sorry, darling. Charlotte is feeling a bit overwhelmed and needs me." My mother. "Harrison's parents have cornered us. Impossible to get away." My aunt and uncle. And from my father, the ultimate gut-wrenching blow. "Things are really celebratory here. So sorry. Your sister's moment is very important to us all." Each message was a tiny, perfect encapsulation of my role, an afterthought, a secondary concern, an obligation that could be regretfully canceled. They weren't just skipping my wedding, they were publicly ratifying my irrelevance. At 3:50 p.m., I was staring at my reflection, a bride with no one to present her, when Mr. Wallace found me. He was our landlord, a distinguished retired diplomat who lived in the main colonial house on our property. He had come to the chapel to offer his heartfelt well wishes and drop off a gift. He found me not weeping, but in a state of icy calm, my phone face up on the small table beside me. Its screen displayed a damning list of unanswered pleas. He saw the screen, his gaze taking in the litany of my family's betrayal. Mr. Wallace, a man accustomed to observing without commenting, looked at my dress, at my solitary figure, then down at his own impeccably tailored suit. "Audrey," he said, his voice imbued with a gentle authority that brooked no argument. "It would be my profound honor, if you would permit me, to escort you." And so I was walked down the aisle, not by the father who forsook me, but by the dignified gentleman who collected our monthly rent check. The wedding was small, but it was filled with palpable warmth. Our close circle of friends celebrated with an enthusiasm that thoroughly filled the void my family had left. Elias's eyes, full of a deep love that needed no validation, were all the family I needed in that moment. After the ceremony, as we greeted our guests, Mr. Wallace approached us. "I happened to overhear that a honeymoon was not in the immediate plans," he said, his expression one of gentle inquiry. We had, of course, prioritized securing the lease on Elias's new larger studio space in Asheville over a vacation. "That is a situation that must be rectified," he said with a decisive nod. He took out his phone and made a brief, easy call. "Jonathan," he said, his tone familiar. "Wally's here. I'm calling about that talented young artist I introduced you to, the one who designed the graphic novel adaptation of your grandfather's Civil War journals. Well, he just got married. Yes, a lovely girl. Wonderful. My sincerest thanks." He ended the call and turned to us, a twinkle in his eye. "An old friend of mine, Jonathan Vance, has a private sailing yacht. He insists you make use of it for the next 2 weeks as his personal wedding gift. His crew is on standby." Jonathan Vance. The name resonated. A famously reclusive philanthropist and historian based in San Francisco, Elias had taken on a passion project for him, a commission to visually tell the story of Vance's ancestors' expeditions, a job he'd done for a nominal fee because the history captivated him. He had treated the reclusive tycoon's family history with the same reverence he gave his own characters. And now, that reverence was being repaid in a way we could never have conceived. The next day, Elias and I stood on the deck of a sailing yacht so elegant it looked like it was carved from moonlight, a flute of California sparkling wine in my hand, watching the Pacific coastline dissolve into a hazy blue line. I took out my phone, captured the moment, and posted a single photograph of Elias and me, our hands clasped, with the impossible blue of the deep ocean stretching out behind us. The caption was a simple declarative statement: "The adventure begins." The transmission wasn't an act of revenge, but a fundamental declaration of independence. My old life had been a supporting role. My new one was the lead. 15 minutes later, my phone screen became a frantic, desperate web of calls and messages. I silenced them all. In the end, there were 417 missed notifications. The first call I chose to answer came 3 days into our voyage. It was my mother, Eleanor. I let the phone ring until the last possible moment, a small reclamation of control in a lifetime of acquiescence. When I answered, I remained silent, allowing the vast, empty space of the Pacific to fill the connection. "Audrey, is that you? Audrey, for goodness sake, where are you? We have been beside ourselves with worry." The performance was so breathtakingly dishonest that it was almost admirable. They weren't worried. They were mystified. They were outraged. They were confronting a narrative they couldn't control, and it was driving them to distraction. "I'm on my honeymoon, Mother," I said, my voice as placid and steady as the horizon. I could hear Charlotte in the background, her voice a sharp, impatient hiss. "Ask her where she got that boat. Ask her who is paying for it." My mother's tone instantly pivoted from manufactured concern to pointed cross-examination. "A honeymoon on a vessel of that magnitude? Your sister saw the pictures. We are all quite perplexed. Did Elias's family have resources you failed to mention? It would have been helpful to know." There it was, the frantic scrabbling for a logical foothold, for any explanation that would keep their neatly constructed universe from flying apart. They needed Elias to be a secret heir, a trust fund kid playing at being a bohemian, because the alternative, that they had made a colossal error in judgment based on their own superficial criteria, was an existential threat. They had to be the victims of my secrecy, not the authors of their own exclusion. This was the pivotal moment, the conversational endgame I had been unknowingly preparing for my entire life. I took a slow sip of my drink, watching a pod of dolphins arc gracefully through the waves. "No, Mother," I said, letting the simple denial expand in the silence. "Elias doesn't have a hidden fortune. He has something far more valuable, something your world doesn't have a column for in its ledger, talent, and a reputation for excellence. And those qualities, it turns out, are their own form of currency among people who truly matter. The silence on the other end was so profound I could almost hear the gears of her mind seizing up. I continued, my voice deliberately light and conversational. The yacht belongs to a gentleman named Jonathan Vance. He's one of Elias's clients. He was so moved by the way Elias brought his family's history to life that he offered this trip as a personal wedding present. It was all arranged by Mr. Wallace. The sound my mother made was a faint, strangled noise, like a balloon slowly deflating. Mr. Wallace, the landlord, the quiet, polite man they had dismissed as a functional part of the background, like a lamppost or a mailbox. The notion that this man, this figure from the periphery of my supposedly small life, could casually command the favor of a West Coast tycoon like Vance was a paradigm-shifting revelation. It violated the fundamental laws of their social physics. It wasn't about the money you had. It was about the respect you commanded, a concept they had never bothered to learn. Mr. Wallace? She repeated, the name sounding like a word in a foreign language she was struggling to pronounce. The man who owns your cottage? The very same, I confirmed. The man who graciously stepped in to walk me down the aisle when my own father was otherwise engaged with a cannon full of blue and pink confetti. It's remarkable, isn't it? When you consistently treat people with decency and respect, regardless of their perceived net worth, they tend to remember it. You and Father should try it sometime. I could hear Charlotte in the background. Her voice was no longer a hiss, but a full-blown squawk of indignation. This is ridiculous. This is a setup. She planned this. She did this deliberately to make us look bad. She did this to humiliate us. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I have to go now, Mother. The crew has just spotted a migrating gray whale, and I don't want to miss it. Give my best to the family. I disconnected the call before the spottering could begin, cutting the final thread with a clean, satisfying snip. I turned to Elias, who was sketching the distant shadow of the whale in his notebook, his focus absolute. For years, my family had made me feel like an apology. They had appraised my husband based on the ink on his fingers, never bothering to read the magnificent stories he told. They saw a quiet man in a simple studio and assumed his world was just as small. They never imagined that this same quiet man was held in high esteem by people whose worlds were so vast, they made my family's manicured suburb look like a terrarium. The 417 missed calls were artifacts of their own spectacular folly. Each notification was a digital ghost of a connection they had chosen to sever, a celebration they had snubbed only to discover it was the only one that mattered. They hadn't just skipped a wedding, they had fundamentally misread the entire map of my life. Standing there, the sea breeze whipping through my hair, I realized the most profound truth of all. By casting me out, they hadn't diminished me. They had inadvertently set me free on a grander ocean than they could ever have conceived. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more real-life experiences about building a life from scratch. Thank you for listening, and remember, when you consistently treat people with decency and respect, regardless of their perceived net worth, they tend to remember it. And do not measure your worth or the worth of others by the superficial standards of wealth and social status imposed by others. Drop a like. Share this story with someone who might need to hear that message today.